This all started at my dad's 50th birthday in June 2023. I'm 28M now. What happened over the past 2 years finally exploded last month, and I need to get this out. Background that matters. I'm from my dad's first marriage. Bio mom left when I was 4. Dad married Ella when I was 6, and she brought her son Brian, who was 5. From that moment, Brian became the real son. I became the leftover. The reminder of Dad's failed first marriage that he had to tolerate. Growing up, Brian got new cleats for soccer season while I got his old ones. Brian's games were family events with everyone cheering. I took the bus to mine alone. When Brian graduated high school with a C average, they threw him a party. When I got a full academic scholarship, Dad told me good because he was never paying anyway. I spent 18 years being treated like an unwelcome guest in my own home. And I never understood why until my grandmother explained it to me years later. Dad blamed me for my mother leaving. Said I reminded him of her. Said looking at me made him remember his failure. But here's what none of them knew. My grandmother saw everything. Every holiday where I sat at the kids' table while Brian sat with adults. Every birthday where my gifts were clearly afterthoughts. Every Christmas where the disparity was disgusting. She never confronted Dad directly. That wasn't her style. She just made other plans. Yo, I need everyone to understand something about grandmothers, okay? Grandmas are silent assassins. They're sitting there at Thanksgiving looking all sweet with their cardigans and their hard candies, and you think they're just watching Wheel of Fortune in their head. No, they are cataloging. They're building a case. Every little slight, every moment of favoritism, every time you think nobody noticed, Grandma noticed. Grandma always notices. And this woman didn't just notice. She took notes and made plans. That's generational wisdom right there. She knew confronting her son directly wouldn't change a grown man who'd already decided to hate his own child. So instead she said, "All right, Bet. Let's see how this plays out in about 20 years. That's not petty. That's strategic. She played the longest game possible because she knew that the only justice this kid would ever get would have to come after she was gone. And honestly, that's the most grandmother thing I've ever heard. Protecting your grandchild from beyond the grave. Icon behavior. Dad's 50th birthday party was at their house. About 40 people showed up. That morning, Dad pulled me aside and told me I was handling the grill the whole party because that's all I was good for and I better not mess it up. 5 hours in Houston heat, flipping burgers while Brian played lawn games and drank with his buddies, not lifting a finger. When I finally finished and made myself a plate, I walked toward the one empty chair at the main table. Dad looked at me with pure disgust and told me I was done, good. Now get out of his way because he didn't want to look at me while eating. The entire table laughed like it was comedy night. Brian added that I shouldn't ruin the view. Ella rolled her eyes and told me not to start my drama again. Like I was the problem. Like I had ever been anything but invisible. I stood there holding my plate. Then, I set it down on the table, looked at my father and told him calmly that he would regret this sooner than he thought. I walked to my truck and left. Brian shouted something about me being dramatic, but I was already gone. 5 hours in Houston in June. For those of you who don't know, Houston in June isn't weather. It's a biological attack. The air is so thick you could chew it. This man stood over a grill for 5 hours, essentially being slow roasted himself, while 40 people enjoyed the party he was feeding. And then, when he tries to sit down and eat food, he literally cooked. His own father treats him like he's a waiter who overstayed his shift, in front of 40 people. And they all laughed. You know what that tells me? This wasn't the first time. You don't laugh at something that shocking unless you've seen the show before. These people had been watching this man get degraded for years and decided it was entertainment. That whole table was complicit. Every single one of them saw a son get humiliated by his father and thought, haha, classic. And Brian, mediocre GPA, hand-me-down giving, never worked a real job Brian, had the audacity to pile on. Brother, you peaked in that backyard playing cornhole. You just don't know it yet. Here's what none of them understood. I wasn't devastated. I was done. My grandmother had passed 8 months before that party, and I was the only one who knew what her will actually contained. The family assumed they knew. They thought the house, the land, everything would go to Dad as her only child. They were wrong. I waited 2 years. I built my life, got promoted twice at my job, met an incredible woman named Haley. 2 years of complete silence from my family. Not one call, text, or message. They simply did not care. Then 3 weeks ago, they finally learned what Grandma actually left me. And suddenly my phone started exploding. Voicemails at 3 a.m., texts begging me to call, Ella crying that we need to talk as a family. This is just the beginning. Part 2 coming because what I have planned deserves its own post. 2 years of silence. Not a single, "Hey, how are you?" after literally being told to leave a family party. And look, this man used that silence beautifully. He didn't spiral. He didn't beg for reconciliation. He got promoted. Twice. Found a whole partner. Built an entire life while they were over there playing house in a home they didn't even own. And they didn't check on him once. That's not even estrangement at that point. That's just forgetting someone exists. Which honestly makes the 3 a.m. voicemails even more hilarious to me. 2 years of "you're dead to us" energy and suddenly it's "we're family" when they find out grandma left him the keys to the kingdom? Nah. You can't ghost someone for 730 days and then pretend you have a relationship when you need something. That's not how family works. That's not how anything works. You don't get to unpause people like a Netflix show when it's convenient. Update 1. Alright, the comments on my last post were wild. Shout out to whoever said your grandma was playing chess while they were playing checkers. Because yes, that woman knew exactly what she was doing. Let me explain what grandma actually left me because this is where it gets good. My grandmother owned the house my dad, Ella, and Brian have been living in for the past 12 years. Dad never bought it. He just moved in after Grandpa died and assumed it would eventually be his as the only child. Grandma let him live there rent-free because she wanted to stay close to her grandchildren. But she saw how I was treated. Every single visit. Every holiday. She documented it in letters she left with her attorney. Letters describing what she witnessed. How Brian opened presents while I watched. How Dad spoke to me versus how he spoke to Brian. In her will, she left the house and the 3 acres it sits on entirely to me. Not my dad. Me. The property is worth around $340,000 in today's market. Dad found out 3 weeks ago when the estate finally finished probate and the attorney sent official notification that ownership had transferred. Now here's where the new complications come in because nothing is ever simple with this family. Brian, who is 27 and has never held a job longer than 8 months, still lives in that house. He moved his girlfriend Ava in 6 months ago. They've been treating it like their future home. Ella has been telling extended family for years that Brian would inherit the house someday. She's been making promises she had no right to make. When Dad got the attorney's letter, he didn't call to apologize. His first message was pure rage. He left a voicemail telling me this was theft, that Grandma must have been confused when she wrote that will, that I had manipulated a dying old woman. He demanded I sign the property over immediately or he would contest the will. He said he raised me, and this is how I repay him. I saved that voicemail. I've saved every single message. Ella took a different approach. She showed up at my workplace on Monday. Haley had warned me this might happen since I'd mentioned to a cousin where I worked, and word travels. Ella found me in the parking lot during lunch and started with the tears. She kept saying she always tried to include me, that I was too sensitive, that she had no control over how my father treated me. Then she pivoted to Brian. She explained that Brian and Ava were planning to get married, that they needed that house, that I already have a good job and apartment, so why did I need to take their home too? I let her talk for almost 10 minutes, just stood there. Then I asked her one question. I asked if she remembered Brian's high school graduation party and what she said when I asked why I didn't get one. She went quiet. She knew. She had told me that parties cost money, and I should be grateful anyone showed up to my graduation at all. Different standards, always. She left without another word. Can we talk about the audacity of showing up at someone's job? Like this woman really put on her manipulation outfit, drove across town, waited in a parking lot like a predator, and thought, yes, ambushing him at work is definitely the move that will fix 20 years of neglect. And she led with tears. Classic. Absolutely classic. I always tried to include you. Ma'am, what? You let your husband treat this child like furniture for 2 decades. You weren't neutral, you were an accomplice. Silence in the face of abuse isn't neutrality, it's permission. And then pivoting to, but Brian needs this house. Oh, so now we're talking about needs? Where was that energy when this kid needed to be treated like a human being? When he needed someone to stand up for him? When he needed a graduation party that celebrated his achievement instead of being told to be grateful anyone showed up? The entitlement is astronomical. They've been living rent-free in a house they assumed they'd inherit, making promises to extended family about property they had zero claim to, and somehow he's the villain. Make it make sense. But here's the part that made me realize how deep this goes. Dad hasn't just been living there rent-free. He took out a home equity line of credit against the property 5 years ago, using forged documents. Grandma's attorney discovered it during probate. There's $47,000 outstanding on a property my father never legally owned. The bank is now very interested in talking to my dad. and I have decisions to make about whether I press this further. Part 3 coming. Because Brian finally reached out and what he said showed me exactly who he really is. Forged documents. This man committed actual fraud against his own mother's property. Like we're not even in family drama territory anymore, we're in federal crime territory. He took out $47,000 on a house he never owned using documents he faked. And you know, he was feeling smart about it too, walking around thinking he pulled one over on the system. Newsflash. Probate lawyers exist specifically to catch exactly this kind of garbage. Everything comes out in probate. Everything. Your grandma's attorney probably saw that HELOC and was like, oh, this is going to be interesting. And the bank is involved now? Which means this isn't just a family dispute anymore. This is potentially criminal fraud charges. Dad really said, I'm going to commit a felony against my elderly mother's property and then be shocked when there are consequences. Sir, you played yourself. You played yourself so hard. Update 2. For everyone asking if I talked to Brian directly, yeah, that happened. And honestly, it was worse than I expected. Which is saying something because my expectations were already underground. Brian texted me Thursday night. Not to apologize. Not to have a conversation. He wanted to meet at a sports bar near his house to work this out like men. His words. I agreed because I wanted to hear what he had to say face to face. Haley thought it was a bad idea, but understood why I needed to do it. I got there first, grabbed a table in the back. Brian showed up 20 minutes late with Ava. Didn't mention she was coming. They sat down across from me, and Brian immediately launched into his argument. He said I was being petty, that holding on to childhood grudges was pathetic, that we were adults now, and I needed to get over it. He kept saying that Grandma clearly made a mistake because why would she leave everything to someone who wasn't even real family? I asked him to repeat that last part. He did. Not even real family. The stepbrother who grew up in the same house, sat at the same table, watched Brian get everything while I got scraps. Not real family. Ava jumped in then. She started explaining that they'd been planning their wedding around that house, that her parents were flying in from Oregon in 4 months, that they'd already told everyone they were hosting. Then she dropped the real bomb. She said she was 10 weeks pregnant, and they needed stability for their baby, and how could I do this to an unborn child? So now there's a pregnancy involved, and somehow I'm the villain for inheriting property that was legally left to me. I stayed calm. I told Brian that Grandma watched him for 20 years. She saw every birthday, every Christmas, every time he got the bigger piece while I got told to be grateful. I told him she made her choice with full mental capacity, and her attorney has documentation proving it. I told him the house is mine, and I would be making decisions about it soon. Brian got loud then. He said Dad was right about me, that I was always jealous and difficult, that my own mother left because she couldn't stand me either. Ava tried to calm him down, but he kept going. He said I was going to destroy this family over a house I don't even need. I stood up and told him that this family destroyed itself a long time ago. I just wasn't going to pretend anymore. Not even real family. He really fixed his whole mouth to say that. After 22 years of living under the same roof, after watching this man get treated like dirt and benefiting from every single moment of it, Brian got the new cleats because our guy got the hand-me-downs. Brian got the party because they couldn't afford one for someone who earned a full scholarship. Every privilege Brian received was directly subsidized by the neglect of his stepbrother. And he has the nerve to say, not real family? My guy, you wouldn't have had half of what you got if there wasn't someone else being denied. You were the beneficiary of systematic favoritism your entire life, and you didn't just accept it. You internalized it. You actually believe you deserved more because somehow blood relation to a stepmother matters more than blood relation to the actual son. And then bringing up his bio-mom leaving? Using the abandonment of a 4-year-old as ammunition in an argument about real estate? That's not just low, that's subterranean. That's telling me everything I need to know about who you are when you're cornered. You'll aim for the deepest wound you can find. Here's where things escalated further. Dad has been calling extended family all week. Aunts, uncles, cousins. He's telling everyone I manipulated Grandma, that I'm mentally unwell, that I'm trying to make a pregnant woman homeless. 3 cousins have messaged me saying I need to think about what I'm doing. My Uncle Jesse left a voicemail saying Grandma would be ashamed of me. Uncle Jesse. The same man who watched Dad berate me at Thanksgiving 2019 and said nothing. Now he has opinions. But here's what none of them know yet. I've already consulted with a real estate attorney. The house has 3 people living in it illegally since ownership transferred to me. I can begin formal eviction proceedings whenever I want. The timeline in Texas gives them 30 days notice to vacate. I haven't filed yet. I'm waiting. Because Dad still thinks he can contest the will, and I want him to waste money on an attorney first. Final update coming. Because what happened Sunday when Dad finally showed up at my door changed everything. Every family has an Uncle Jesse, that one relative who witnessed everything, said nothing, and now suddenly has strong moral opinions when it affects someone he actually cares about. Where was this energy at Thanksgiving 2019, Jesse? When you watched your nephew get publicly humiliated and just kept eating your turkey? You were real quiet then. But now that there's property on the line, now that Brian might lose his future free house, now you want to invoke Grandma's memory? Grandma who, by the way, left literal documentation of the abuse she witnessed? Those letters exist, Jesse. Your nephew has receipts from beyond the grave. And this whole making a pregnant woman homeless narrative they're spinning. This is manipulation 101. Weaponizing pregnancy to guilt someone into giving up legal property. Ava and Brian had zero claim to that house before she got pregnant, and zero claim to it now. Creating a life doesn't create a deed. That baby is Brian and Ava's responsibility, not their get-out-of-consequences free card. Final update, Sunday morning. Dad showed up at my apartment. He got my address from my cousin who I'd stupidly trusted. Haley answered the door because I was in the shower. By the time I came out, Dad was already inside, sitting on my couch like he owned the place. He looked at me and started talking before I could say anything. He said he was done fighting. He said he knew I was angry, but this had gone too far. Then he said something I'd waited my whole life to hear. He said he was sorry, that he knew he'd been hard on me, that he was asking me, as his son, to please not do this to the family. I sat down across from him and asked him one question. I asked why. Why did he treat me the way he did for 25 years? I told him I needed to hear him say it. He went quiet for a long time. Then he admitted it. He said looking at me reminded him of my mother, my face, my expressions, even how I walked. He said every time he looked at me, he felt the humiliation of her leaving. He said he knew it wasn't fair, but he couldn't help it. He said Brian was easier because Brian was a fresh start. 28 years of being treated like garbage because I look like the woman who broke his heart. That's the reason. Not because I did anything wrong. Not because I was difficult. Because I existed. And there it is. 28 years of wondering what's wrong with me. Answered in 60 seconds. Nothing. Nothing was ever wrong with him. He was a child who had the profound misfortune of having his father's failures written on his face. Imagine being 4 years old, 4, and your crime is already committed just by existing, just by looking like someone. And this man, this grown adult, looked at his toddler son and thought, "You remind me of my pain, therefore you will carry it." That's not parenting, that's projection. That's using a child as an emotional punching bag because you couldn't deal with your own trauma. And the worst part? He knew. He knew it wasn't fair. He said the words, "I couldn't help it," which is the excuse of someone who never even tried. You absolutely could help it. You could have gotten therapy. You could have done the internal work. You could have at minimum looked at your innocent child and decided to be better. But you didn't. Because Brian was easier, fresh start energy, no baggage. And now you want forgiveness? I told him I understood. Then I told him it changed nothing. I pulled out the eviction notice I'd had prepared for a week, 30 days. I told him that Brian, Ava, Ella, and him needed to be out by the end of next month. I told him the bank was also pursuing the HELOC issue separately, and that wasn't my problem to solve. Dad tried to negotiate. He asked about buying the house. I told him the price was $400,000 cash, no financing, and he had 14 days to decide. He doesn't have that money. I knew that when I said it. He asked about renting. I told him the monthly rent would be $2,800 first and last month, upfront plus security deposit. He can't afford that either. I'd done my research. He started raising his voice then. He called me vindictive, said I was punishing a pregnant woman and an unborn baby, said Grandma would be disgusted by who I'd become. I stood up and walked to my door. I opened it and told him Grandma left him letters. Letters describing everything she witnessed, how he treated me versus Brian. She left those letters with her attorney specifically so he would know why she made her choice. I told him to ask the attorney for copies if he wanted to know exactly what his mother thought of him. Dad left without another word. The letters. The letters. Grandma didn't just disinherit her own son, she left him a written explanation of exactly why. She made sure he would know that she saw, that every moment he thought he was getting away with it, his own mother was watching and documenting and judging. And she made sure that information would be delivered at the exact moment he'd be forced to confront it. That's not just inheritance planning, that's a message from eternity. And this man called his son vindictive? After admitting 5 minutes earlier that he spent nearly 3 decades punishing a child for his ex-wife's face. The absolute lack of self-awareness is staggering. You don't get to spend someone's entire childhood treating them like a burden, admit why you did it, and then be surprised when they don't roll over for you. Apologies without changed behavior aren't apologies. They're manipulation tactics. Dad wasn't sorry he hurt his son. He was sorry that hurting his son finally had consequences. That was 6 days ago. The eviction notice is filed. Brian and Ava are scrambling to find somewhere to go. Uncle Jesse called again to curse me out and I blocked him. 3 more cousins have unfollowed me on everything, but honestly, I don't care anymore. The voicemails haven't stopped. 3 a.m., 5 a.m. Ella crying, Dad threatening, Brian alternating between rage and begging. They're losing the house they never owned in the first place. Brian's wedding plans are destroyed. Ava's parents are apparently furious that their grandchild will be born into chaos. All because Dad couldn't look at his own son without seeing the woman who hurt him. All because for 50 years he blamed a child for something that was never that child's fault. At his birthday party, I told him he'd regret it sooner than he thought. 2 years later, he's learning what that meant. I'm not forgiving anyone. I'm not reconciling. I'm just done being the family scapegoat. The house is mine. The decision is mine. And they can figure out their own lives the same way I had to figure out mine.